I remember a time when Republicans were very careful about and worried about the government, particularly unelected people.
Well, we can't trust the government anymore.
Having access to personal data.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You are the government.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, is that the American people now are saying,
you are the government. 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 You are the government.
Well, we can't trust the government.
Interesting, and how the Supreme Court decided to define title. But in any case, so as things continue to progress, I'll take one step back because I forgot one component of supporting it. In 1991, 1992, knowing that this constitutional issue was still there, knowing that we needed to address the issue of title and rights, we started what was called the BC Treaty process, which was a process that many nations went in with a lot of hope in terms of how it would work, how it would proceed. Unfortunately, it did not produce the results that lots of people had been interested in or were interested in doing, and so it kind of floundered. And today we had a handful of nations that have gone through. We've got 3 current nations that their legislation for implementing treaty will be coming to the legislature this spring for debate. There's been 5 other nations in BC that have entered into a modern treaty. The first one was not done through the BC treaty process, and that was with the Nisga'a in terms of the treaty that happened in British Columbia. So all of this is built up to where we're doing. In my period of time when I was minister from 2013 to 2017, we were respecting the case law. We were going forward. We were doing agreements. I'm covering everything from cultural agreements to creation of First Nations Health Authority to economic agreements, revenue sharing, a whole wide range of things around that, including return of some land to First Nations in specific cases. From there, after 2017, the NDP, when they came to power, decided to take an approach of introducing UNDRIP as legislation in British Columbia. Now, prior to that, I had been in discussions with the federal government about actually implementing UNDRIP in BC, and I said there's 2 or 3 chapters in DRIPA, or UNDRIP as it's called, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, which could be interpreted as being very problematic. So we need to find how we would define that, but then still be able to use the UNDRIP as it was intended, which is guidance in terms of building relationships and how to work between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. However, the federal government at the time wasn't interested in doing that. That was 2016. Come along 2017, the NDP came out, and then they decided to implement this. And it's interesting how it's formed. When you go back and look at the debates in the legislature, it was meant to be, as it was discussed as we had discussed, and I had discussed it with the federal government, which was it was meant to be this guiding principle, it was meant to be this introduction of kind of components. It was meant to help in terms of negotiations. It was not meant to be a veto. It was not meant to be implemented, quite frankly, in the way that it's turning out in British Columbia. And now we're seeing that with court cases and other issues that are happening in the province today. And it's actually very interesting because I went back and looked, and if you look at the original debate on the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in the UN, it was rejected originally because it was considered to be too strong in terms of veto and powers and authorities. And it was changed, and the debate was very clear in the UN that it supported what our perspective was, which was it meant to be as a guiding principle and not coming in as in force as it is being done today in British Columbia. So it's interesting how UNDRIP has sort of morphed through DRIPA and the Interpretation Act and the implementation in British Columbia. So going forward, we're now in a situation where I want to pose a question to everyone in this audience, which is, what does reconciliation mean? And I'm saying that because we're talking about DRIPA, and we're talking about all these things, court cases, and Constitution, and all the legal sides of things and implementation. But really, what does reconciliation mean? And I'll give you what I think it should mean, and other people will have some different opinions, I'm sure. Where you have differences, or where you've had, some challenges between peoples in the past, you need to find a path to be able to bring people forward, bring people together, to reconcile those differences, to find a path forward together. So that tells me two things. First of all, yes, there are issues, there are long outstanding issues that need to be resolved. We need to find a way to resolve those issues, to bring people together, but it also means something else, which means there's an end to reconciliation. You've accomplished it, you've achieved it. And it's not something that goes on forever, because you've brought people together. And maybe that takes decades, maybe that takes months, but you've brought people together and you've addressed the issue. Because if it's going on forever, then you're obviously not reconciled. You're not actually achieving what reconciliation to me is meant to be. And so I also think about it from the perspective of what does that end result supposed to look like? And from my perspective, what I believe it should look like is it should bring equal opportunity for all. There will never be equality for all, because everybody's born different. Everybody has different lots in life in terms of their skills and abilities and things. Not everybody's a brain surgeon. Not everybody is a baseball, player. There are differences, but there needs to be an equal opportunity for all. And so I look at reconciliation is, how do we address our past? How do we get to a place where we can bring people together? And how do we get to a place where there is that equal opportunity? And now this is why now I'm also want to just talk about why I support the idea of repealing DRIPA. Because when you look around the world, anywhere there has been legislation, anywhere there has been laws that put in place which give rights to one person that are not given to another person, it creates friction. By its own nature, it creates conflict. It doesn't create reconciliation or solutions. If I split this room in half and I say, I'm going to put a gate on the road out there, and the people on this side have a key and the people on this side don't have a key, what happens? Sooner or later, the people on this side say, that's not right. We're not being treated fair. It's not equal. And so you end up in a situation where the people on this side ultimately want to tear down the gate. So what have you done? You've created friction. You've created conflict. And when you look at actually what our Constitution is, and I've got to say this because it's true. When you look at our Constitution, Section 35 was meant to try to resolve the long-standing history and the problems, but it has created two classes of people. And quite frankly, the Indian Act has created two classes of people too. So how do you fix the historic problems that have gone on? How do you right those wrongs? How do you find a path forward? But how do you find a path forward that gets to an end and is able to achieve what I believe should be the goal of reconciliation? How do you get to a place where we don't have to legislate rights for one people that another people don't have? How do you get to a place where we actually have that equal opportunity? Now, it's going to take work. It's going to take, obviously, time. It's not going to happen overnight, and it doesn't just happen immediately. But there has to be a willingness and understanding on both sides that, and an agreement in terms of what needs to be achieved that can be measured from a perspective of equality, that equal opportunity for all. And so, like I say, I look at it and I think, okay, I look at the agreements that I signed over time. What were they about? Well, they were about recognition, they were about respect, they were about opening up opportunity, they were about having First Nations engaging economically. And there's something that one of the fathers of the Nisga'a Treaty had said, who has since passed. And he once said, that First Nations have been held back economically for decades and decades. And it's high time they have the opportunity to catch up and if possible surpass. I couldn't agree more. Because that's the only way you get to that equal opportunity. But you can't create that, you can't achieve that by saying, I'm going to take from this side of the room and give to this side of the room. It has to be how you create the opportunities to do it. It has to be how you add, how you create those potentials. So that is what my perspective is. Because if you end up, if you tip the balance too far one way or the other on either side of the scale, you can end up with friction. You can end up with conflict. So now I want to talk just a little bit on the Cowichan case, because this has stirred a lot of emotions, a lot of resentment that I think is actually very dangerous in British Columbia. So the Cowichan case was another finding of title, and which is fine. That's how we decided this court case stuff should go. Maybe there's an argument to be made that we need to change how these go, but in the Cowichan case, it has determined that Indigenous title and private property rights can coexist. But here's the problem with that. Both Indigenous title and private property rights give exclusive use to the land. Indigenous rights and Indigenous title gives First Nations the right to go on a property, to utilize a property for its purposes, to benefit from a property. They can introduce Indigenous law and make decisions based because it's their land, it's their title. Private property rights is the same. If I own a piece of property, I can put up a fence on that piece of property, I can put up a sign saying no trespassing. If somebody comes on the property, I can call the police and have them hauled away because they're trespassing on private property. I get the contract of having private property means I get the value of that property, I can buy, I can sell, I can use that property within the context of provincial law and municipal bylaws. The two cannot coexist. And the judge admitted it and said, yeah, this is going to be a problem. So how do we resolve this issue? It was a finding of title. Clearly the First Nations had been there, utilized that land, and within the definition of title, within what our jurisprudence has built over the years, and under Section 35, but it's also clearly private property based on this side. And the challenge is private property is the foundation of much of our economy and much of our society. And so this has now risen this issue to being very confrontational. I read an article just the other day about the folks with the Cowichan First Nation are talking about all the hate and friction that this is causing. That is not reconciliation, folks. We have to find a way through this, but that is not reconciliation. That's the opposite. That's going to head down a path that is not a good path for our society. So how do you address this? And I talked to a couple of elders from the Nisga'a Nation about this and said, well, where does this go? And he said, look, we're not going to be kicking anybody off the land. I mean, none of that sort of stuff is going to happen. But eventually, the land will return to the nation. Okay, so if you accept that, what does that mean? That means your land has no value. It means you've lost all the value of your land. It means basically you can't sell your land because who would buy it?
Well, you guys all already told it. Fear mongering. Come on.
I'm saying truth, please. I am saying truth, and that is the truth of the matter. And if you don't believe that, look what's happened at the Silcotin case and what happened to the private property down there in terms of value. It has been dramatically devalued because they don't have road access and there's all kinds of problems and issues. So the challenge that we have as a society is very simple. How do we address these two things that can't coexist?
Who devalued it?
Just so if we're going to start having outbursts, we're going to end up closing this down real quick. We can't have that. In all the greatest of respect. And for those of you that got here a little late, and we've opened it up behind us. This is going to be a respectful dialogue, and we went, so what happens if you want to ask a question, when John's finished with his opening statement, you'll stand in front of the microphone, state your name, and ask your question. But if it's going to get into the point where this is one of these things where everybody could start yelling out, it just goes into chaos. It's not a respectful way, it's not a good way.
How much longer
So
is the opening statement? Curiosity?
well, he's
Yeah, we would like the opportunity
Fair
to
enough.
speak.
There was no land acknowledgement at the beginning of your
So
speech.
fair enough. So what we're gonna do is, if you wanna do that, John will be finished in a few minutes, and then please stand in front of the microphone and ask your question. Thank you.
So as I said,
Good
this is
point,
the challenge that we have.
Johnny.
Is private property
No
rights versus
acknowledgement of the
indigenous
land,
rights, indigenous title.
right?
And it is not reconcilable.
Johnny Moore said there's
in the
no
form of
knowledge,
coexistence.
acknowledge
to
of
be
the
a
land
resolution.
holder.
How do we solve this? And that's, whether it's DRIPA or not, doesn't matter. Because that wasn't done because of DRIPA. There's other issues associated with DRIPA, which is, things like the Mineral Tenures Act, and there's many other things that are going on. But I don't want to go into too much more, because obviously there's lots of people that would like to say a few things. But this is the challenge that we face as a province, as politicians, as people in our society, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. This is the challenge that we face. How do we resolve this? Now, I think there is a way forward on this. I think there is a way, and it's one of the reasons why, I talked a lot about what I call economic reconciliation. Because what are you trying to achieve? If we have 204 nations in the province, 204 decision makers in the province, nothing will get done. How do we achieve this within the context of Canada, within the context of British Columbia, and within the context of respecting the historic people who are here, the Indigenous First Nations? How do we resolve it? And it's not an easy answer. Because it doesn't matter what the answer is, you're going to have friction. So we have to have a path that ultimately goes through these tough waters, but gets to a place where you can achieve what I was talking about, which is reconciliation and equal opportunity. Now I know there's a number of First Nations people here in the room today, and, I understand what has been taken away. I understand all of that. That's why I signed all the agreements.
You have no idea.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
So, in any case,
You
I
have
understand.
no idea.
And I also understand the long-standing, patience, with everything that has been done over time. I get it. That doesn't change the problem that we face as a society and how we try to resolve this and work together. Because I can tell you, there are some people in the First Nation community who say the answer is everybody should just pack up and go back to Europe or whatever country you came from. That's not an answer. We're here to stay, just like Indigenous people are here to stay.
We're
We have to
we're
find a
still
path
here.
forward. We have to find a path that doesn't create all of this friction, that can be respectful of both rights. So with that, it's a lot to think about and a lot to talk about, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to have some good questions.
So please, if you have a question now, before you start, actually she did put her hand up first, if you wouldn't mind. Please go to the microphone and.
I respectfully ask Terry to speak.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. If that's your wishes, thank you.
On behalf of the Gidimt'en Hereditary Chiefs, and actually Denise Ross and Sakazet Gilget, we just want to acknowledge that the territory that you're situated on and that you've come to do business on is Gidimt'en. The territory is called Gidimt'en. It's been a part of our long-standing
Right on,
history.
Sherry.
And I thought it's really important that we start things in a good way. When we're talking about reconciliation, one of the most important things in reconciliation is, number one, if you have a conflict and you've caused harm to somebody, you don't get to say what reconciliation looks like. You have to talk to Indigenous people, and I agree with you that it shouldn't continue to go on and on and on. And when you said, this is what I think it looks like, That's a part of the problem. You know, we're not reconciling it, we're taking it from your perspective and what reconciliation should look like. It's really important. The reason it's going on and on is a lack of perspective from the Indigenous people who've had harm imposed on them. And I also agree that when you say, like, what's it going to look like if your houses are situated on Indigenous territory, because Indigenous people can make laws. You know, they can change the structure of what you currently know. Canadian law, the Canadian government has been able to make laws for years. You know, I think all of the fear-mongering that you're doing, yes, Indigenous will be able to make laws, but Canadians have been doing that to people all over Canada, including British Columbia. You know, I don't think you should be taking this from a fear perspective. And we've never, you know, and similar to the Nisga'a people who've gotten to this place of treaty, there's never been an intention, ever, to displace people. We've lived among the people that are in our valley for so many years. And reconciliation is important to the people of this valley from my experiences, just as much as it is to us as Indigenous people. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Chief Madik. I'm one of the 3 head chiefs of the Gidimden clan, whose territory that you're situated on. So for me and my perspective, when you talk about dividing people, conversations and how you started this conversation does exactly that. And you're traveling throughout this province, starting these conversations in a horrible way. You know, and it's self-serving. And, you know, that doesn't do anything for reconciliation, but could cause further harms to something that you're claiming to want to rectify. It's really important that we start these conversations from a place of respect. And not just the respect for the Indigenous people, but for the people who've been living among us for so many years. You know, it's not healthy. It's not okay. So, you know, I welcome all of you who are continuing to live among us. We work and play amongst each other.
Good one.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you for welcoming us. I remember I was having a conversation with the Sokotin leaders back in 2015 after the case, and we were talking about how to proceed and the work to be done in their territory. I remember we got to a place where we were talking about it, and I said something to them that I meant from my heart, which is one day I hope they'll be able to forgive us for what we did to the Sokotin people, because it's true. The wrongs that have happened. You know, when you mentioned, First Nation laws, in this country, in democracy, there are some fundamental components, things that are foundational to society, that I believe in, and I will always stand to defend, and I won't be apologetic about it. I'm sorry if they offend somebody. But if somebody is creating laws that are going to impact people, those people have a right to vote for that government that creates those laws. If somebody's going to be implementing taxation, people have a right to vote for the people who are implementing taxation. And this is where the conflict is, and I agree with you entirely. The challenge is we have Canada, which has existed, which is over top of traditional territories of First Nations. And we have British Columbia over top of those nations. And the question is, so who has the authority for the laws and for the things like taxation? And if the authorities are all the 204 First Nations in British Columbia, then you've got 204 different nations in British Columbia. Canada doesn't exist in British Columbia anymore, if that's the case. And you're creating some sort of other type of arrangement. If that's the goal, then please come out and say it. Because we would have to change our constitution, we'd have to change this. Otherwise, it's Canada that implements the laws, it's British Columbia that implements the laws for Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. And yes, Indigenous have the ability, certainly the court cases have said this, in terms of creating laws and doing things on their territory. But this is where the friction comes in. Because if the people who are living on the territory are not Indigenous, they don't have a right to vote. They don't have a right to run for government. They don't have a say in terms of an Indigenous government and implementation. And this is where this rub comes. How do we reconcile those differences? And that's a challenge. For example, in Haida, with the recent agreement with the provincial government and the Haida Nation, Haida's title has been declared over the entire islands, which includes all of the private property and includes all the infrastructure that's on the island. So what that means is that Indigenous law will apply, and that's written very clearly, will apply to their lands. Now it's in there in terms of how they protect private property rights as part of that legislation, but ultimately no provincial legislation can override Section 35 rights. So that legislation will not stand up if it's ever challenged. And so this is why this is a big, important issue that needs to be talked about. And we can't be afraid, despite how challenging and issues and difficult this is, we can't be afraid to have this conversation. How do we resolve these things?
Thank you. Denise Sakaze Skyze, Saisozi, Jackie Bose, Gelsehi Tista, Sinet,
The hospital many years.
Sibeb, the late
How
Bill
many
Holland.
millions of dollars
First and
taxes
foremost,
went out?
I want to acknowledge everybody that is under this roof. I'm glad that I let Sherry speak before me because she had spoken everything that I wanted to say. And when you're really focusing on truth and reconciliation, that word tends to be non-actionary. And when action starts happening with truth and reconciliation, we take 2 steps forward and then we take 3 back. Because of the hateful rhetoric and the divisional tactics that is happening today. We've been living in the North forever, and we've always had reconciliation here. We've always had truth here in the North. And with you coming today, because it's working in other areas of the province, it's not going to work in the North because we work together here. So I don't know what your intentions are on coming here, but we're working fine here. I think you should just step aside and let us live the way we're living, because truth is alive here. And reconciliation is actively going. And with this fear-mongering that's happening, that's not going to happen here. We have unceded territory here. We have respectful relationships with a diversity of people that live in this area. And I'm actually really disappointed on the conversations that's happening today, because that hateful rhetoric is not going to work here outside.
Awesome, Jackie.
My name is Sarah Newton, and I live in Smithers. I'm a relative newcomer here, and I have felt very welcomed by Indigenous people and settler people. And I know there's a lot of divisiveness in this topic, and it is, she said, very disappointing. The idea, just fear-mongering and trying to pit people against each other, I don't understand. DRIPA is a mechanism with no ulterior motives. There's no money behind it. It is successfully working in Norway. Norway has higher standards of living than here. Norway is not bought out by big business, same as New Zealand, where Truth and Reconciliation and DRIPA have been working. You can try and shoot holes in that, but the reality is the Canadian Constitution and the court system is trying to implement a long-term plan where people can get along. They're trying to implement a plan that is not divisive. And that is the bottom line, is it is a mechanism that works. And if we keep trying to undermine it with injunctions and appeals that aren't working, we let the mechanism roll out the way it's successfully been in other countries, we have a chance here. Thank
you. I hold the name Slato and Cassia House, which is the Grizzly Bear House, whose territory that you're on right now. I have a couple of concerns to address about what you said. Your lack of knowledge of history. I also hold a master's degree in Indigenous governance from the University of Victoria. And I would just want to, I don't think that I'm going to change your minds about anything. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want other people to understand what is actually going on. People that do live in our community that may have some concerns that you've addressed and that you've brought up, and the way that you brought them up is very divisive, like everybody said. But this problem didn't start with DRIPA. This problem didn't start with Section 35 in the Constitution. The issue, you referred to it, the issue around Native people is actually what everybody has called the Indian problem. And that's what you're trying to address in the words that you just spoke. And that's a long-standing issue that our people have never ceded, surrendered, or treated any of our territories. 22,000 square kilometers of territory in Wet'suwet'en territory. Most of BC is untreated. The treaty system didn't work because we already have title over our territories. We already are sovereign nations. We don't need the Canadian government to tell us that that exists. Delgamuukw Stayaway said that we have never ceded or surrendered or extinguished our title to 22,000 square kilometers of territory, as well as all of the hereditary lands in Gibson territory.
Do that again.
So this problem of dividing and this conflict was caused by the Canadian government, by your government. It's perpetuated by your government, saying fear-mongering and saying that if we're allowed to make our laws, if we're allowed to enact our laws on our territory, that non-Native people are going to suffer. And that's a huge misunderstanding of what acknowledgement is. That is our body of laws. That's how we govern. And I'm sorry to say, but the state of the world right now, is the Canadian government doing a good job? I would say no, probably not. UNDRIP is supposed to help address the conflict that was created by colonization, that created these two tiers of people, that used racism as a tool to dehumanize us, to rationalize the theft and the forceful, illegal occupation of our territory. And so when you're talking about equal opportunity, my question is, equal opportunity for what? Because our vision of how we want to live in the North, and our vision of how we implement Wet'suwet'en law on our territories doesn't look like what you're talking about. Equal opportunity for everybody is to live in a vibrant, beautiful place in the world where we can actually have peace, which our laws allow for after thousands and thousands of years of developing them on this land. That's what would happen. And it's only because of the Canadian interference and the Canadian state that keeps oppressing Indigenous people that has caused the conflict for people to come up and actually fight to have DRIPA. That's why conflict happened, in order for us to have DRIPA. And so my question is equal opportunity for what? Because just like Madiq said, it's your perspective about what equal opportunity looks like. That's your perspective from a colonizer viewpoint. And also, where did you get your history degree? Because all of your facts are wrong. Melissa.
You asked the question. I do want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak, gives them a chance to speak. But you asked the question, so I do want to respond to that. And you asked the question of, you know, equal opportunity for who and in what perspective. What you're advocating for is that Canada no longer exists here in this territory because it's your sovereign nation. I'm sorry, I'm Canadian. I'm a proud Canadian. I'm British Columbian. I'm a proud British Columbian. And I'm not going to be advocating for the destruction of the nation of Canada. So that's my perspective. Sovereign nation means that. Perhaps you should understand that side. I'm sorry if I've spent it. But sovereign nation means that you have complete control of yourself, which means Canada does not have authority, and British Columbia does not have authority. So that is what that means. And if that's where it ultimately goes, if that's what society decides to do, well, then that's what will end up happening. But I'm certainly not going to be advocating for that.
Any other questions? I think that we should know, like, if you're giving people all this information, what is your education?
Good evening. My name is Tony Greco. And,
didn't want to answer Molly's question of where did you get your history education.
First of all, I want to thank you MLAs for putting the time in that you do. It's a very difficult job that you do. And I want you to know from this Canadian, I respect you and don't always agree with you, everything you say. But I do appreciate the time that you put in because it takes away from your families, you get death threats, and a lot of other bad stuff which shouldn't happen. To answer the Dalmanuk Treaty court case, that court case never ended because lawyers have written in the paper, our local paper, a couple of times now, that there was supposed to be a second court case on that, which never happened. So that answers your question. The other thing is that I love this country. My grandfather came from Sicily in 1906 to Hazleton. We've been here for 120 years. There was a great tragedy in my family. We didn't get justice either. Not to get onto that but there's one thing that I've asked. I had a meeting with a previous MLA here, Taylor Backward, because I was raised on Chinook salmon, but I'm not allowed to have one Chinook salmon. Back then, when we could catch them, we could catch 10, I think, a month. Now, we can't even catch one. The natives can catch as many as they want. And I went to Mr. Bacharach, and he gave me an hour of his time to talk to him about that. I only want one, not 10 or 15. Can't have it. I've talked to conservation officers. If you do, you'll be arrested. I don't think that's very fair. The other thing is that it seems to be always us against them. I don't hear the thing we together. We can't build a country, a strong country, when it's always us against them. We can't respect each other when it's always us against them. I don't know how much history you people know, but if Canada was such a bad country, why did that famous chief that beat up General Custer, Chief? No, it wasn't Joseph. But anyway, I know the history just forgives me. Sitting Bull came to Canada. He brought his natives to Canada, brought his people to Canada, and was protected in Canada by the mounted police for 6 years until the United States promised on paper that he would not be executed if he went back. That's the only time that he did go back, and he lived to be a ripe old age. The other one was Chief Nesbitt, who was being forced to go on reservation. And he did not to fight that. He took his people towards Canada, came within 20 kilometers of the border, Canadian border, before he was encircled by the American cavalry. So if Canada was such a terrible country, why were these natives from the United States making their way to Canada? Now, I recognize that there was bad things happening for schools. But have we done, I mean, that goes without saying. It shouldn't have happened. But we judge those people with today's eyes, instead of judging them with what they knew back then. They didn't have any psychiatrists. They didn't have psychologists. They were mostly from England and Scotland. And in England and Scotland, residential schools were the proper thing. Shakespeare went to residential school. So, have we done nothing good toward the natives? Have they not profited from this at all? Has it always been bad, bad, bad? Is there nothing we can agree on that, you know, that, yeah, some good things did happen? You have better medical, living longer, better homes. We're getting to a point where we are sharing more resources. But it's always this negativity, negativity, negativity. And I'd like to hear some positive. Something positive would be nice to hear once in a while. Well, thank you very much. But that's what I have to say. I love my brothers, sisters, all. I mean, my wife and I own a small mobile home park, seniors park. Bonnie George, some of you know Bonnie George.
Yes.
She's the daughter of a chief. When she called me, so I had a place for rent. She said, before I come up there, I want to tell you that I'm native. Because I just had a bad experience in Smithers, where she told the person, she didn't tell the person she was native. She went there. When he saw she was native, he says, oh, I just rented an hour ago. So he says, I want you to know that I'm native before I come up there. I said, if you don't mind me being Sicilian, I don't mind you being native. Come on up and let's talk. She lived in my park for 6 years. So I don't know why we can't get closer together. As long as we're going to be, we want this, and we want that, and we can't agree on anything. Always this fighting. When I talked to Mr. Baccarat, one of the things I said to him, why don't we get rid of the Indian Act? I hear a lot of this. But some of the things you missed, Mr. Ronstadt, the Indian Act was banned on oath. Pierre Trudeau and Christian, you can read in his book, want to do away with the Indian Act. This is the white paper, still sits collecting dust on a shelf. Because they had it done, and the native powerhouses came to Ottawa and said, you can't do that. If you do away with the Indian Act, we are going to assimilate it. We lose all our power. So that's part of the history of Canada too. So you can't have it both ways. That's what Christian told me. So it never got done. In Alaska, there's no reservations. If I was Prime Minister, one of the first things I'd do is get rid of reservations. Why do we have to have reservations? And people in Alaska won't understand the natives there live very well. And Ellis Ross, I've heard him say that the natives who get off the reservations do better than the natives who live on the reservations. So why are we still have reservations? Thank you for listening, and hope we can all
because the government put us on the rest. It's the Canadian government who put us in the cage.
That, you know, today, the federal government still treats Indigenous people as wards of the state. That's why there needs to be change. And, you know, and this isn't related to DRIPA, but there's a stat that I find extremely disturbing. Extremely disturbing. Over the last 5-6 years, the average life expectancy for First Nations has dropped by 6 years. That is, to me, is completely horrendous and unacceptable. Why? If we're doing such great things in this province and changing and DRIPA and all this kind of stuff, why suddenly has the average age dropped by 6 years for Indigenous people? That is something that needs to change. We can't carry on with the same path.
Denise, Dakwite, Skyze, Saisozi, Caleb Mitchell, Luxili Vista, Sene Hieshni Giltehu, Sene Crystal Granke, Sabeb Rodney Mitchell, Sini Meskabu Helen Mitchell, Tate Satana Delie Zetni An, Kenny Mitchell. Tlaanito Ta Louise Granke. My grandma Louise used to own a restaurant here in this community called Louise's Kitchen. And when I was born, my mom had me at the age of 17. And she had me with my Wet'suwet'en father. His name's Rodney, and he's the most gentle and kind soul out there. And I lived this world between two of them. My mom's white, and many of you know her. And my grandmother has history from Romania and came over here with hers as well. And then I live here today
as Deputy Chief of Witsat First Nation, and I have been on council for the last 6 years. And I'm one of the youngest people on council. I've went to school. I've also had my time with drugs and alcohol, and I'm not ashamed of that. But I've also seen the healing work that our system does. And I've also witnessed the beauty of our system in the feast hall, where I've also been to the legislation of Canada, and in that space, I noticed there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of scrutiny from across the room. And I've never seen that in our governance hall, and it was appalling to me. And so when I'm talking to you today, I was taught by my elders, my grandma included, you have to think with your heart and your mind and work goddamn hard, and I do. I do work hard for my people, and I'm very passionate. I'm also from European descent, and I'm also passionate about that part of me. I also witnessed on my white side that my great aunt, she was raped over and over again by the Catholic priest when she went to go be a teacher at residential school. And when she had a problem and she needed to go to psychiatry, the psychiatrist raped her too. And so these type of issues are not singular to Indigenous people, but the issue of the Indian Act, as well as the repercussions of leaving us in the dark, has caused such issue and misinformation that is being spread, especially in the Valley. My grandparents, Helen and Kenny, they had a cabin on their territory out near Houston, and in the 70s, Canfor had burnt it down, and Canfor had an agreement to pay them to help build it back because they had admitted fault. And before that, in the early 1900s, there is a case law called Gray versus Tyee, and it was a time when our medicine man was giving a ceremony around an afflicted individual. The RCMP came through the door and charged them, and they were charged with a year's wages for drumming and singing around an afflicted individual. That is against our rights, and at that time, we were not able to even hire litigation or have legal representation in the court of law when we were burnt off our territories and not able to even represent ourselves in a right way. So when you speak of equality, Mr. Rustad, I want to emphasize that there has never been equality, especially when we currently are not able to even own property on a reserve we've been allotted. How can we even be economically making it when we have no equity to even work with? So my question to you, well, I think there's a lot of things you can respond to, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So, first of all, thank you for standing up for the leadership of your community. It's important, and thank you for that work you're doing. I couldn't agree more. There is not equality today, so I'm not talking about status quo. We've got to find a place where we get equal opportunity, and we're not there. We're nowhere close in terms of it. And so, the issues you've raised is exactly that. How do we work through this so that there is that opportunity? Because you're right, you can't even own your own land on reserve. It's crazy. Why would we say that's what we should carry on with society? Of course that shouldn't happen. And First Nations should be able to have their laws and decisions and how those territories. And I also talk about, I've talked about this many times publicly, so I'll repeat it here. I've also talked about the return of land strategically for creating those economic opportunities, for creating that potential. How do we address that so that it creates those potential?
And I'll just follow up. I know there's a lineup, so I'll leave it with this. But I share the same sentiment around shared decision making and making sure we're well informed before we jump too quickly into things, and that it's not just one body or one person that can make those decisions. We live together, we thrive in this community, and we can be better together. And I agree with the gentleman before me about how we talk to each other. It makes a difference. And when we believe in people, like young leaders like myself who are educated, who do the work, I have a lot of life in me, and I will knock on every door and sit with you to talk about what does it look like for the future, because our laws have a place for love and connection. And in our feast hall, when we hire somebody, actually you pay them right front. All the finances are done in front of you, so you can't hide anything. And so that's a difference in the way that taxation works, is that sometimes we don't get to see where those things funnel down and how they impact us right directly on the ground. And so that's something that I could see as a way that we can measure those things, is how do we measure reconciliation, perhaps through the there's just so much data we could go through. I love data. So I'm a health science major. I love health science, and I'm just really grateful for everybody here, and thank you for listening, and I hope that we can continue this conversation forward. And what I want to preface with that conversation moving forward is that we must have respect for one another, including those that serve our communities, have been voted in, and those that we feel important to be in that space. So I hope that you can commit to making sure that we are included in the next conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I've been to Gazette many times, signed agreements with them. Matter of fact, the road going in was something that I made sure got paved. And so there's, yeah, I've got a little bit of history there. Not a lot, obviously, a very short period of history, but I have a little bit of history there. Should think about running provincially one day. When this opens up. Yeah, I understand. Actually, there's something I forgot, and the speaker before you asked, would like to hear some good things, or some positive things. Well, there has been one thing I think that has been quite positive that has happened over the last number of years. And back in 2017, with children that were in care in British Columbia, there had been a 50% reduction in the Caucasian children in care, but there had been no reduction in the Indigenous children in care. And I thought that is absolutely wrong. And so there's been an approach that is working on now, which is having First Nations take over their own authority for looking after the children, for keeping within the family, from stop taking children away in terms of it. And it's not working everywhere yet. In some places it's working, and it actually is achieving some great results. So there are some things that I think are positive. That is in terms of working together between government and nations, and supporting what they're wanted to do to resolve the issues has actually worked quite well.
Thanks for the cement. Denise, Skyze, Saisuzi, Algan Cutler, Kitsehi, Tista, Unistotan, Father Clan Exiliu. I don't know how I would follow up against my younger cousin Kayla there, but I'm going to give her a go. I wrote this all down so that I wouldn't forget anything, and I'm going to read it out. And thanks for coming today. I sure wish you had acknowledged it, and then that would be a really nice step towards reconciliation. It might not mean something to you, but it does mean something to a lot of people. So just a little heads up on that one. My name is Algan Cutler. I'm the elected chief of Witsec First Nation. I work alongside our hereditary chiefs who've been working really hard. No matter how much you try to divide us up, we're going to somehow find a way to work together. So for something a little positive, and I'm going to try to make it quick because I see there's a lot of people. I want to perform an act of reconciliation here today. If anybody wants to participate in that with me today, I encourage you to do that. I'm going to teach you guys a word today that I sat down with my mom and came up with this little slogan for our community. And it's more than a little slogan to us. It's actually what we believe in. And I just want to address that, I am Muslim, and I don't want any Europeans to go back to Europe. I don't want anybody to go back to anywhere. I assure you of that, and I assure you that our hereditary chiefs don't want anybody to go back to Europe. We love our neighbors. We only look for ways to work together, John. So if anybody wants to participate with me today, I'm going to teach us a little Wet'suwet'en and saying that we say out in Witsec, and it's gained some traction, and I believe it really brings people together. So the first word is, and it's tough to say, and you might be shy to say it because it's not close to our English language. Ashka Zeltas. Ashka Zeltas.
Ashka Zeltas.
Now we got our land back to music. Trick you guys. See how tricks go? They used to trick us with whiskey and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, I should just stick to my script. First of all, I really want to say Tapi and Kasai, I love you guys. I love all of you. I love my neighbors. I love the people that don't love me. That's fine. I love you guys. Believe it or not. John, I love you. I do. Sharon, I love you too. This guy over here making faces when people are talking, I love you. You make little smart comments and smile around the beard at us when we're just here trying to do what's right, John. That's about it. thank you for participating in that. I'm going to read this out. I just don't want to miss anything. Here's the chief of Witsett, representing the of a governing First Nation, not to endorse any political party, but to speak to what creates certainty on the ground. There's a lot of talk about DRIPA creating legal uncertainty, as you would agree, John. I want to be clear, DRIPA did not create Indigenous rights. These rights already exist in Canadian law. What DRIPA attempts to do, imperfectly mind you, is clarify how governments should meet obligations that courts have recognized for decades. Repeal would not remove uncertainty. It would push uncertainty back into First Nation communities and investors. When communities avoid dealing with Indigenous rights early and directly, the result is a delay, conflict, and litigation. We hear the call for a negotiation-based approach clearly. Witsett is not opposed to negotiation. The Wet'suwet'en are not opposed to negotiation. We negotiate all the time. But negotiation only works when there are clear rules, balanced power, and an outcome that can be relied on. Negotiation without a framework is not reconciliation, it's discretion. On resource development in northern BC, Witsett supports economic development when it's done right. Projects move faster and last longer when First Nations are involved early with real authority. Certainty comes from consent, not from sidelining the right holders. If DRIPA needs improvement, then let's talk about improvement. But repeal would signal that reconciliation is conditional and reversible. That message undermines trust, stability, and long-term investment. Wet'suwet'en will continue to govern her lands responsibly, with or without DRIPA. The real question is whether governments choose partnership or perpetuate conflict.
Right on, Elgin.
Thank you for that, and I'll share the sentiment, okay? I love you and I love everybody in this room, despite the fact I may not agree with everybody. So I appreciate that. I'll also say, I mean, that's why I signed 435 agreements. And all those agreements were not shotgun agreements. They were agreements that sat down in respect, working together, trying to find a path forward. We had great negotiators, I had a great team that was working with me, and I'll never forget, when I first took over the ministry in 2013, the province had a grand total of 18 agreements signed. 18. And the Premier gave me a mandate. She said, I want you to sign 10 more agreements. And I was like, oh my God, how on earth am I going to do this? And the entire time that we've been doing all this before, we've only had 18 agreements. And by the end of just over 4 years, I'd signed 435 agreements. And it was done by being respectful. But also by being transparent and open with Indigenous and non-Indigenous in terms of how to proceed with things. And that part of the challenge I think we have today with many of the approaches that's being taken by the current government is secrecy. You know, for example, there was an agreement that was signed down in the Seashelt area. That was signed 3 months before the election. It wasn't until 3 months after the election that anybody even heard about it. That's not transparency. That's not the way that we should be building reconciliation.
And sorry, I forgot I was going to recommend a book, but I forget the name. It's by a local author named Sheila Peters. I read it years ago, and it talks about the removing of our people on the Telkwa High Road, and it really economically crippled us in bad ways. It involved burning barns down, overly fishing, all that kind of stuff, starving cattle, all sorts of nasty things that people don't like to mention when they talk about reconciliation.
Oh, I know. And I'll tell you one of the histories from my writing, and you know this well because the Wet'suwet'en people were impacted by this as well, but when the dam was built on the Yachako River in 1956, the dam was built, and the people came to the First Nations that were living in the area saying, the dam's built, the flood's coming, you got 2 weeks to leave. There was no decision, there was no engagement, there was nothing. And that whole people, were displaced and are now living in Wet'suwet'en territory.
We'll talk about that later.
purposely brought people from all different ethnicities, backgrounds, socioeconomic. I brought them together, and the mayor of Smithers, rest in peace, had phoned me up and asked me to take all the names out of the story. That doesn't sound very transparent to me. I respectfully said, sorry, I'm not going to change the book that Sheila worked so hard on writing, and the kids read it out, and it was amazing.
Zanet Hotia, Nadine Morin Oshia. I've grown up here in Smithers, never actually spoken at a town hall meeting before, so this is pretty interesting. Anyway, I'm a member of the Tahltan Nation, and happy and proud to live on Wet'suwet'en territory. I want to speak on behalf of DRIPA. I want to speak on behalf of DRIPA as a representative of Skeena Gold and Silver, who successfully went through what is the first Section 7 or consent agreement in Canada. It is the first time a First Nation has given their consent for a project. And I want to say on behalf of both the nation, because I'm a member of the nation, and the company, and the province of BC, that the collaboration that existed through that process demonstrated that we can work together. I'm very proud of the fact that our environmental assessment certificate conditions, the conditions in our Mines Act permits, were jointly developed between an Indigenous government and a provincial government. So there was recognition of both governments' laws. And I would encourage anyone, because these things are public, I would encourage anyone to take a look at that. So I am absolutely 100% opposed to repealing DRIPA. We need to move forward. We are an example that this can happen. This can be successful. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I'm very pleased that that project has gone through and doing that, but I have to correct the record. I entered many agreements on mines, on power projects, on power generation, that was jointly worked on between Indigenous government and First Nation government, and agreements were reached long before DRIPA was introduced as legislation. So that has been happening for years. However, under the new process, you were probably the first ones through the new process. But how you went through and did that has been done in the past because I was there. I did those agreements.
You're wrong, you're wrong. And you're giving false information again.
All of those agreements are online and available, and they were negotiated between First Nations and the government. Respecting the nations.
Howdy, my name is Anna Marie Holland. I'm Cassia House of the Wet'suwet'en territory that you're on. I have lived the life of both worlds, living with foster care, and I've lived with a lot of white people, and I've lived with Indigenous people. I've had my childhood basically taken away, and that's all because of residential schools. I'm second generation of residential school survivor, and my children are third generation. The past 10 years, I'm just learning about my culture, and I'm learning about the Peace Hall, and it's a lot, and I'm very, very passionate about it. But I'm also very passionate about the people who raised me. The last people that raised me, they were white folks, and they were pretty amazing people. And I just love everybody. I just think that you say that you feel how we feel. You have no idea what we feel. I've lost so many friends and family on the highway of tears. I've lost so many friends and family in jails. I've lost so many friends and family through addictions. And you say that you feel how we feel. I don't believe that you do. If you can walk a day in the life of any of our shoes or my shoes, I don't think you'd be able to handle it. I don't think you'd be able to be up here to tell the story. I don't think you'd be able to stand there with a smile on your face or even a smirk or whatever it is that's going on. I don't really have a question. I'm just telling you this is how I feel.
Thank you. So to be clear, I've never said that I feel what you felt, because I can't. I can't, because I've been through that. I said I understand. And to that, particularly you mentioned the Highway of Tears and losing people along this highway and losing people to drugs. One of the things that I did when I was minister is I did the first ever gathering of family members of missing and murdered women, Indigenous women. And we did this in Prince George. We did 3 days. In the 3 days, I spent every hour of that day talking to the family members. Meeting after meeting after meeting, hearing the stories, hearing about what went on in the communities, hearing about what went on in the families, hearing about the tragedy, hearing about this. And we came out of that and we had an idea around how we could help, the province could help a community, not implement or do anything, but support the work in a community to bring these issues out and have them talked about in the public, have them brought forward so that there could be a change in terms of some of the things that went on in the communities. And we started the work in fall of 2016. We lost the election in 2017 and that work died. And that's very unfortunate. But I'm very passionate about that, and that's change that I want to be able to see still happen and certainly support that work. It's not something I want to do to First Nation communities. It's First Nation communities that want to do that work, and I want to try to support and help them. And that's what we did with the family gathering. It wasn't the province that did this, it was the families that put it together. The province supported it. And we built a quilt out of it as a memorial to this. That's still to this day in the legislature. So I can never feel what you felt. And I would never claim that. But I do have an understanding.
I'm just saying, I'm 50 years old and I'm just learning all this stuff, and I'm trying to make sure that my children do not waste any more time losing our culture, because this is slowly going away, and it's really making me pretty angry.
And to that extent, I agree entirely. And that's one of the reasons why many of the agreements that I signed included cultural components, supporting language, supporting culture within communities. Because it's important that that happens. No. Anyway.
Denise at you, Saka's at you, Sky's at you, Saisozi, Johnny Morris. I come from the Anaskaski house of the Girimden clan, where the house lies blocking the trail. I've lived in the Buckley Valley, situated
UNDRIP, when it was written, Chief Ed John was one of the people from British Columbia, was one of the people who worked on UNDRIP, who worked on the language, and who worked on bringing that forward in the United Nations.
Thank you very much. Happy Messiah.
Chad Norman Day, Ushia, Sisies, Seli, Shlareen Nasta, Smithers Nasta. My name is Chad Norman Day. Before I introduce myself from the Tahltan side, I have lived on and off in Smithers for 30 years. And my life has always been bouncing between Smithers, Telegraph Creek, University. Never been at a meeting like this, which I'm kind of embarrassed to say because I've lived here for so long. But I felt that it was important for me to say a few words. Some of you may know, I have quite a few children. 4 of them are Wet'suwet'en. They've always grown up between my house over here, a block and a half away on Girimden territory, and then at their mother's house there outside of town, which is probably Girimden territory as well. The comment that I wanted to make is actually more so directed towards you, Sharon, because I've never met you. And I just wanted to say that I love the comment earlier that was talking about UNDRIP principles being utilized in other countries. And you obviously cover an area that has a lot of Indigenous people who have a lot of brilliant folks in all those nations from Wet'suwet'en, Gitxsan, Nisga'a, Tahltan. Sorry if I forget anybody, Tlingit, Kaska. And in the future, and I like John, and we've done work together when he was with the Liberals, but I just encourage you in the future to utilize your platform in your position to get like-minded, progressive folks that can talk to you about DRIPA from our nations together. I think that would be a really progressive thing for you to do. I understand that you're part of a political party and maybe you need to fall in line with that, but you're on the opposition right now. DRIPA's not going anywhere right now. We don't know what's going to happen with the next election, and I think most Indigenous people would probably hope that DRIPA is still around after that. I don't believe DRIPA is probably perfect right now. I think a lot of Indigenous people would agree, and I would just encourage you to utilize your platform to bring Indigenous people together to make DRIPA the best that it can be, to educate you on some of the pros and cons in all of our territories. I don't believe you've been up to Tahltan territory yet. I think you should be up to the mine sites. I think that you should be up into the communities. And I just want you to know that, as somebody that is Tahltan, that is blessed to live here in Wet'suwet'en territory, I would be willing to assist, just like I was willing to assist with the last political party, because at the end of the day, we as Tahltans, and I think a lot of Indigenous people feel the same way, we don't really care which political party is in place. We just want to make sure that our rights are recognized. We want to make sure that our children can thrive alongside everyone else's children. And that's really all I wanted to say, because at the end of the day, you're our MLA in this area, and no matter who anybody here voted for, we want to work with you to make sure that we can do the best in this region while you're here. Thanks.
I wasn't able to make connections there to have a visit with any of their leaders. If you can help me with that, I'd be most grateful. And like I said earlier, this is my home. The reason why I wanted this venue tonight was so that we could have this discussion. I could meet these people, because I don't honestly know who they all are. Although I've lived here my whole life, some of these individuals, I don't know how to connect with them, as I said to Kayla. So it was a bit of a, I guess we'll call it an oversight. We had a town hall. DeWitt said chief or deputy chief wasn't able to come. There was a death in the community. So what they said is until our morning is finished, then we don't go out in public. So I don't know when that ends. I don't know who else to contact. So this is why we're here tonight, having a conversation, meeting the people, making the connections, so we can move forward with this. And I'm more than happy to meet with each and every one of you on your territory and have these discussions. I would welcome that.
I just wanted to add that I think what's happening today is actually beautiful. I think this gives us an opportunity in the valley to have some discussions, alleviate some misconceptions, and not come to it from a place of dividing our community. We can't afford that. We've watched it happen in the past, and it's been harmful. We don't want to have another thing that we have to reconcile. I think that we don't need politicians to dictate whether we can do that or not. I think that our people can easily come together in these formats and start asking the questions, alleviating some of those misconceptions, and really start to vision and sort out what this could look like as a collective. Because as it stands right now, we're sitting with a panel who has an agenda. And to meet that agenda, divisive comments are being made, and we understand where you're coming from. We don't necessarily agree with it, but I think, it's really brought to my attention the need for us to be sitting in rooms and having conversations. And so I'm saying, as one of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, that we're open to arranging or holding space to have this dialogue. So that's just something I thought I'd throw out there. Let's have those conversations. Alex, I'm the same.
Hello everyone. My name is Joe Hugg. I was born and raised in this valley, and I'm blessed to be raised in a valley with such multiculturalism. It's been a beautiful ride. My father was an immigrant from Switzerland, and my mother also. And my father, when I was a little boy, he always said I was the last of the great optimists. And he didn't mean it as a compliment. So I'm just here to say, I am listening to some of the sentiments of some of the previous speakers, and with all due respect to what Canada, or the United Nations, or the World Economic Forum, or the province, what they mean, we, in the region of northern BC, all over the place, there will come a time, I'm quite sure, where we will be on our own. And we, in the municipalities, in the regional districts, with the First Nations, now need to form a backup generator, because Canada is the generator. And I don't know, like I say, I'm normally an optimist, but the writing is on the wall. Things aren't really looking good. And I'm talking probably years ahead, but we need to form the backup generator. And we need to now get together and say, okay, what are we going to do when this all falls apart? And like I say, this is not my nature to think something's going to fall apart. But I see it and I feel it. I'm not 100% sure, but we need a backup generator. And the fact that we're here today, it says a lot. I wish this could have been done in 2018, before the bill was passed. I don't agree or disagree with that bill. I think there's some good things in it, but there's nothing on there that we couldn't do here in the region. Anyway, I don't really have a question. And I want to also thank you three for being here. And we need more of these town halls. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, and I'm with you. I'm worried about where things are going, both within the country and around the world. And it's one of the reasons why I talked about the fact that as a country, I think we should be talking about renewing confederation. If we were to take the 10 provinces and 3 territories together today, with all we know, with First Nations partners, and try to form this entity called Canada, what would it look like? Where would you have the divisions of powers and authorities? How would you structure it to bring them together? How could you get agreement between these authorities to put together this nation called Canada? And I think that's a conversation that we all need to have right across this nation, because I'm quite frankly a little worried about what's going on right now.
Howdy, hello. My name is Carmen Nicole. I'm a settler who moved to Falkland Valley 50 years ago and never wanted to leave because of the beautiful land that we live on and share. And I've raised my daughter here, and I've raised my niece and my grandson now, I call him. And maybe they'll never leave.
Hey, Dolly, your mom is talking.
Wet'suwet'en territory. Wet'suwet'en are sharing their territory with us, and we're very privileged to have that right. I wanted to make a couple of comments first about my disappointment with this forum. One was when I saw the poster about the forum, or whatever you might call it, meeting. I thought, that's great. And then it named 3 conservative MLAs who would be the panel. And I was looking for other people besides Conservative MLAs, and I expected there would be an Indigenous participant to offer a different perspective than the Conservative BC Conservative Party perspective, which I know you all agree on, and that's what you're presenting. And that was really disappointing. The second disappointment, before I get to the better part, was that I came in late, sorry to say, after 7:30, so I didn't get to see you speak ahead. I came in the midst of good questions that people were putting forward and information. But at 7:30 until just very recently, all of those questions were being put to you, John, and our MLA, Sharon, was actually saying very little. And that's really disappointing for me, because the people in this room and throughout the Valley elected you and need to hear your voice. And I understand that John might have more years of experience, but I think you should be the primary person responding to the questions being put forward. And if you need John, or I'm sorry, the other gentleman as well, as a backup for pieces of information that you don't have, maybe they could offer that. But you are a representative.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, right.
Hey,
Because
Bonnie.
he was looking like John was.
You mean this guy?
But I think what I said earlier that you missed was the fact that this was supposed to be an information gathering session, because there's lots that I need to understand. We wanted to have the dialogue back and forth between what we already know, or what I'm trying to sort out, and the people on the ground. I don't want to do it on Facebook. I want to do it in a community hall. I want to look you in the eye and have the conversation. I want your feedback. Otherwise, how am I going to be able to assess this when I go to Victoria to make decisions? It isn't all just about what's written on a piece of paper. I'm a firm believer in face-to-face consultation, and I don't have all the answers. But I do want to hear your voices, so that when we're discussing it and I'm reading material, I can help discern those decisions. So that's why I've been listening. That's why I wanted to listen to you tonight. And yes, I agree, we need to have a lot more of these. That's what we need to do. If it's uncomfortable, well, so be it. But the bottom line is, you need to look people in the eye. You need to have a face-to-face conversation. And I agree with the chief from, I'm sorry, Megan, I'm going to have to get your card, because I can't pronounce all the names. That's what I need to learn. This is my home. I was born and raised here, with a lot of you sitting in this room tonight. So I completely understand it. And as Bruce will tell you, and as John will tell you too, the North is different than the South. And I agree with everything you said about standing together and having a different path for Northerners, because we are resilient. And I don't want to lose that. I want to embrace that, but I want to know what you're thinking and feeling, so that we can have those discussions. So I completely agree.
I'm glad to hear your voice.
Sometimes the boys don't let me have it, but I'll take over.
I don't have a question. I just have a position, I guess, and what my understanding is, because I'm not well educated on DRIPA, but my understanding is that Canada as a nation adopted the UN Declaration of Independence of Indigenous Rights. And that was, I don't know, before 2020, several years back. And Canada took some time to actually sign on to that declaration, I understand. One of the few countries in the world that sort of balked to begin with, but did finally decide, yes, they should support that declaration. From that, my understanding is that the provinces then are expected to be able to implement the Canadian adoption of the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights by forming frameworks so that the principles in the declaration can actually be enacted on the ground. And I have yet to look at what those things are. Luckily, somebody brought a handout, and I would recommend, if you've got one with you, pick it up and take it home and read it, because it does state the recommendations that were made and what it would mean. And I just flipped and came to water. I thought, oh my God, it's talking about water, like one of our most important resources. So I need to go back and read that, and I recognize other people do. Without a framework to build on, it's like our skeleton. We need a framework. We can't simply resort to bit by bit dealing with conflicts as they come along and differences. Build a framework, present it. If it doesn't work well, make a few changes, but do it with all the parties involved, not with repealing it as the Conservative policy is right now, or making amendments, or as the NDP government are doing in BC right now, suggesting amendments that might not be suitable or accepted by First Nations throughout BC. So I think rather than the repeal, you might go back to your comment about possibly amendments, working with the First Nations in BC for any amendments that might come. So that's my position. I support DRIPA as it is, and hope that it stays in place. Tweaks for changes would be great. Make it better than it is now. Aside.
Denise, Takuze, Skyze, Simiget, Sigam Hanach, and Kabu Wilson, Hapulach, Sami, Wilks, we get Diwai, Kaskast. My ancestral name is Hapulachsa. I come from the house of Wiget, from the Fireweed clan. I'm honored to be here on Wet'suwet'en territory. My mom is Timsian from Kitkatla. My dad is Giksan. He was the latest of the Dalgamuk people. He held that name, and I'm proud of that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about repealing DRIPA. It's not going to happen. You can try. You can take it to court. DRIPA and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples are the foundation of human rights. Nobody can give you your human right. Nobody can take it away. They're inherent. You can't do it. You can try, and it's going to cost the government millions, hundreds of millions, as we all know. They've been fighting in courts for decades, hundreds of millions of dollars, fighting Indigenous peoples for our basic human rights. And I'll tell you one thing, I want to move on to the Cowichan decision. The Cowichan decision is just the first of many to come. And how we deal with that decision is how we will move forward as a province. The Cowichan don't want your land. They're not going to take your house. We know how that feels. It's not nice. I think what the Cowichan want is just recognition. Recognition that this is Cowichan land, this is Indigenous land. Maybe a little bit of tax money. I'm not saying we should increase taxes, but a little bit of taxation so that our communities can be better. We can have better schools, we can have better health systems, and on and on and on. Now I hear all the fear-mongering coming from the stage. Oh my God, the economy's going to crash. Oh goodness. It's not going to happen. The sun's going to rise tomorrow. We're going to go on. We're going to go to Safeway. We're going to, hunt in Safeway, if that's where you hunt. But all this fear-mongering is just division. He's up there talking about, we need to come together. This is all a division. Right in front of you. The Cowichan don't want your land. They want recognition. And I can't speak for them, but that's what I see. They just want recognition. The Cowichan isn't devaluing your land. Who's devaluing your land? The government and the banks. It's not the Cowichan. Cowichan didn't say your land is worth nothing anymore. It's the government and the banks. These people, right here. These are the people that are creating division, sitting in front of you talking about how we should bring everybody together. There's a prime example of how rights and title can work with the Haida. I'm good friends with a lot of the Haida. I work with them. The Haida had a plan. It's called The Rising Tides, and you should read it if you get the opportunity. The Haida have 98% control, not 100, John, like you said earlier. They didn't want the other 2%. I work with them, I know that. They have 98% control over the island. And they worked with the municipalities, they worked with industry, and they got them all on board so that they had a plan that worked for everybody. And it does. They didn't have to go to court. They didn't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars litigating over decades, like the province in Canada likes to do with Indigenous peoples. Spending your hard-earned tax dollars. And trust me, I pay taxes every day. People think Indigenous peoples don't pay taxes. I do. Every day. So it's time for the governments, if you want to create certainty, you always talk about the uncertainty of the Indigenous problem. If you want to create certainty, it's time to deal with rights and title.
First of all, I'd like to just thank everybody for being here. You know, it's beautiful to see so many people that take an interest in, the circumstances that we're facing right today. But anyway, Singiget, Sigamanak, Sakwazek, Denizek, Skyzek, and ladies and gentlemen that are here. You know, I try to stay out of politics. That's one thing, but I'm always going to get dragged into it somehow. And what I feel all the time is I don't vote because I'm Indigenous, because your governments don't represent us. In no way, shape, or form do they represent Indigenous people. So I feel like every time as a hereditary chief, my name is Chief Sahale. I'm of the Sun House of the Laksamishu clan, which is from the Greater House of the Killer Whale. These people, the fellow that spoke before me is my brother. You know, in our culture, we're the same clan. And one of the things that we found, it was 1997 when we got the Delgamuuk decision, where the Supreme Court stated very, very clearly that the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en territories preceded the federal and provincial government. They said that our territories have never been extinguished. But they didn't give a decision. You know, how could a colonial government make a decision on people that have been here for thousands of years? So these are things that we're faced with. But it did very clearly say that we have interest in the land. And John talked about reconciliation. Really, really poorly. Because what reconciliation is, when we figure out how many square kilometers of our brothers, white brothers and sisters here, whether you're first, second, third, fourth generation, all the farms, all the municipalities. How many square kilometers is all of that? I should ask, how many thousands of square kilometers of land, Wet'suwet'en land that's been alienated from us? I'm from Wet'suwet'en. You know what we're allocated? We're allocated 2 square miles that we all have to share. 2 square miles. You know, I've had many non-Indigenous people ask me, oh, you got such good land, you got this and that. I said, yeah, 2 square miles. So when John talked about reconciliation, Molly's very familiar. She's building a village out at 44. Winnistoten's building a village out on her territory. And we, the Laksamisio, are also building a village out there. These are villages that were historical villages in the 1800s. And we're reconstructing them. And I had government officials coming out and asking me, what are you doing? I told them all this talk about reconciliation. I said, this is what reconciliation looks like on the ground. And I think there that the political parties that get into BC after Gilgamesh, they have a duty. You know, they signed an agreement that we haven't completed. It was an MOU, very clearly stating that all house groups have legal jurisdiction over their territories and could govern them. That's reconciliation. And the provincial government could do a declaration giving us the 22,000 square kilometers and working with us. The willingness to do that will never happen. And I'll tell you why it would never ever happen. Because our resources, underground and above ground, they've already taken hundreds of billions of dollars of resources off our land. And that's why they do not want to make a deal with Indigenous people. Because there's just too much wealth under the ground. And they want it. So what happens? How do you deal with that? When you let greed from these big corporations and government run and take control over our resources. So I think it's really important there that we all work together. In the 70s, the Wet'suwet'en proposed a tripartite government, and we just got laughed at. We said we'll work with all the municipalities, we'll work with the provincial government. We don't care about the federal government. They were the ones that created all of this stingy, all of the non-trust in everything that we have ever tried to work for. But I think it's really important that we do work together, like you said, John. But just saying sorry is not enough. Getting rid of UNDRIP is not enough. We've been here for thousands of years, and we will be here for thousands of years more. So I think, yes, we as communities have to work together. We spent the last 35 years working with your school boards, working with your municipalities, Hazelton, Smithers, Tokwa, Houston, Burns Lake. 35 years building a really close, loving relationship. You know, trying to get rid of all of the systemic racism that's been put upon us. And if we all work together, we could do it. We just have to respect one another. We call that wagus. That's respect. You know, when we could communicate and just respect one another, and I'm sure, yeah, we'll always have differences, but I mean, that's just human nature. It's just human nature to have differences. But yes, I always look at our people as being very respectful. Even Father Maurice there, he was an anthropologist before a priest. And he was the one, when he came here and he saw our culture, he's the one that coined the term about the Giksan and the Wet'suwet'en as noble savages. Yeah, we were savages, so we were noble. You know, what a contrast. So, you know, when I look at this, I think, yes, John, you are barking up the wrong tree. I think you should use UNDRIP and try to make it work. And I think that we could really work together. I don't know if you remember me there, we got into little bickers once in a while on Facebook. Okay, I'd like to thank all of you, and lots of love to all of you here. And thank you so much for coming and being a part of this open house. Okay, lots of love.
Okay, it's coming up to 8:30, so we'll do one more question. If you don't mind, I'd just like, before the question is, I'd just like to thank everyone who got up and spoke today. But I won't take any more time. Go ahead with your question.
I'd like to thank you guys for setting up this meeting. Thank you, John, Jenny, Bruce. And I'd like to recognize all of our First Nations people here and everybody else. Because you know what? There's something special about every one of us. One thing is we breathe the same air. But you know what else? We're all created in the image of God. That is what's special about us. And we can get along. I agree with you, Adam. We can get along. And some of my best friends are First Nations people. And so I just want to end with a comment by the Creator. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. For every one of us. That's for me. That's for all of us. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. We wouldn't be in this situation if that was the case all the way along. And we would have better relations with our neighbors. We'd have better relations between parties. We'd have better, there would be no racism. There's only one race, and that's the human race. Created in the image of God. You're special here because you're created in the image of God. You might not have believed that you even have a creator, but he created you and he gives you every breath. So I just want to end with that. What Jesus said. Do unto others what you'd have them do unto you. You see somebody, I want to tell you one little story. I was heading, this was years ago, and I was walking down the sidewalk, and there was a First Nations lady that was having trouble walking, and I thought, I should help her, but would I offend her or not? And then another guy came and helped her across the street, and I thought, I missed out. I missed out. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. If we all did that, it would change everything. Jesus said the whole Old Testament is summed up in that one statement. So that's all I want to say.
I've got a minute, literally, so I won't take up much time. As reported to the Vancouver Sun, September 29th, 2024, in a statement that was posted to the Conservatives' website in February of that year, quote, established for conditions in other countries, not Canada. Whether or not you wrote that statement, it was still said, and it was still posted to the Conservative website. I had a lot more that I wanted to say. For the sake of brevity, I won't. What I do want to say is that it's disappointing and it's saddening to see a repetition of the same mistakes by politicians in this province over and over and over again, while claiming to be categorically oblivious and innocently negligent of the reality that is lived by so many people. And to sit up here, the three of you, respectfully, with zero Indigenous representation on your panel, with zero conversation in advance, it is disappointing to me as an individual who has lived here for nary a decade. There are so many things that have been said tonight that I have taken issue with respectfully, and I've written it down, and I unfortunately didn't have a chance to say 99% of it. But you can't eat money if we're going to provide a robust natural environment for the future if and when things hit the fan, as Mr. Hugg said. We need to start thinking seriously about bringing our legislative frameworks and environmental protections out of the dark ages, that is to say the atomic era of the mid-20th century, and we can't afford to put spillways from coal mines directly into Wet'suwet'en in the event of a flood. It has been over 0 degrees Celsius for the past 2 weeks at the beginning of February. And if you needed a louder canary in the coal mine, I genuinely do not understand how you cannot hear the shrieking yet. This is a problem for all of us. And I know that I'm about to be cut off, so respectfully, please don't. My one question to yourself, Mr. Rustad. For whom are there too many teeth to the original draft of DRIPA? And I ask that in earnest, because as has been said by some other folks, it seems as though the largest objection is when the power of the British Columbia or Canadian colonial governments to veto projects not going through is when there is some limitation of power that is seen as not being appealing. The people, regardless of their indigeneity, need to have a voice. And there needs to be an ability to veto certain projects. Perpetually stating that things are in the public interest while forcing projects through is not the way forward with any population, Indigenous or otherwise. Tabi Masai. And you're welcome to answer that question about DRIPA and why it had to be unto, whether now or another time. How the heck does this thing go in?
I know you're, Tizvan? Yeah, I know you're standing. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name's Nadia. I'm a resident here, and I'll keep it quick. I know it's getting late and folks are tired. So I'm just feeling a little bit like I'm looking for clarification from you, John, around some of the things you said tonight. So I've heard you say that you don't support Indigenous ownership of land, and I've heard you say that you do within the same hour. And then I wanted to just bring up some points from the legislative record where you've spoken directly in support of UNDRIP and the HIDA agreement connected to DRIPA. And then very quickly, close to in the same breath, sort of said no. So in 2019, you said in regards to UNDRIP, we believe that implementing the UN Declaration will help us continue to build a stronger British Columbia that includes everyone. And then in 2024, in regards to the Haida affirmation, you said, I want to start by acknowledging the Haida Nation for the work that they have done for many, many decades to reach this point. This is a historic step. This is a path that we need to do to be able to bring predictability, certainty for Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, right? And then that same day, the next day on April 23rd, you claimed the deal was a secret mess for property owners and pledged a full repeal. And what we're hearing today, again, is that you're calling for a repeal of DRIPA, right? When in many cases,
you are in support of that legislation. So I'm just wondering, how can we trust what you're sharing and what you truly stand for? And you referenced earlier the increase in racism that Indigenous people have experienced since the Calhoun decision. And that is a disgrace. And I just want to point out, what is the source of that, right? It's coming from the misinformation and fear-mongering that you and others who are sharing similar messages are spreading around. And again, Indigenous folks bear the brunt of it, and the increase of racism that they are experiencing. So please don't blame the Cowichan decision or Indigenous people for that, because that is on the misinformation and the fear-mongering that's being spread by folks like you. So I just really want to acknowledge everyone for coming. Kudos to all the folks that are showing up here with respect and love and wanting to work together, and I totally agree with that. I like that we're gathered here to talk about this. I think this is how this work is going to be done, by people who live here coming together to figure it out, not with division. That's just going to make things worse. And so I'm wondering, where do you really stand, John, in terms of this, when you've spoken so differently at different times?
Thank you, and I'll answer those questions. So, first of all, the DRIPA legislation was brought in. What I said, you can go back and read all of my comments, not just cherry pick the things that you decided to pick. What I said about it is I was fine with implementing it. Matter of fact, even in the last election, I said I want to use UNDRIP as a guiding principle, but not as legislation. And what I said, I voted for because I had no choice in the political party. So, when I actually debated DRIPA, the legislation coming forward, what I said was I actually identified that there's passages which would be very problematic, and they need to be implemented properly. And if you look at what the NDP said, particularly when you got to committee stage on DRIPA, what they said is not what they're doing. They said it was to be a guiding principle, that they follow case law, they follow jurisprudence, and this is meant to be guiding and supportive, not become law that drives and overrides the existing Section 35 jurisprudence that was built. That's very clear in the legislation, and yet it is now being implemented against what the NDP said it would be done. So that's DRIPA. When it comes to hybrid legislation, I was in full support of it, and I'll tell you why. Back in 2016, there was a court case that was going to come forward. I was the minister responsible at the time, but of course court cases are done by the Attorney General. And when that was coming forward, I went to the Attorney General's office and I said, look, what are we going to do about this? And the Attorney General's office said, oh, we've got a really good argument, we can win this in court, we're going to fight this, and we think we can be successful. And excuse the language that I'm about to use, but I said to them, bullshit, you're going to get your butt kicked. There's no way you can win this case. Haida people have fought and defended those islands for centuries, for probably thousands of years, but I mean centuries in terms of Canada's existence. There's no way that you'll win the court case. So we have to do something different. And they said, well, what do you suggest? And I said, look, we should put a with prejudice offer on the table to offer all the islands, everything, excluding private land and infrastructure. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't a compensation, and I'll get to that in a minute, that needs to be dealt with in terms of the questions. But we can't have that conflicting jurisdiction between Indigenous rights and private property rights, between Indigenous rights and the province when it comes to things like infrastructure, roads and power lines and these types of things. And so we started doing that work. Of course, we lost the election, the NDP got rid of it. So so when it came to Haida, when the Haida agreement came forward, I was in full support. Until the next morning, when the deputy was on a call giving me a briefing on it. It's the first time I had a chance to see the legislation and discovered that private property was included with Indigenous title. And that's where I said, no, I can't support it because of that. But I didn't have that information when the agreement was introduced in the legislature, because this NDP government was too secretive and wouldn't share it. So that's why the differences between what I said in the legislature and what I said the next day. When it comes to blaming Indigenous people, I am on record many, many times in the public saying, please do not blame the Cowichan people for this court case, for what happened. Do not blame them. They're only fighting for the rights that and what the Constitution allows to be done. Don't blame them. It is the way the Constitution is set up, is the way the courts have done. It's the court decision that is the problem, and what governments are doing, not the Cowichan people. I've been on record saying that many times, so please never accuse me of that. So with that, I'd like to go into a little bit of a closing statement. Oh yeah, sorry, the other thing you said about I'm opposed to Indigenous people owning land, and I support, no, I've never said I'm opposed to Indigenous people owning land. Matter of fact, I'm very clear on record during the last election saying that land needs to be returned strategically to First Nations to enable economic reconciliation. That's what has to happen. We have to do this, but we have to have some sort of agreement in terms of what we're trying to achieve. What is the end point? Adam talked about all 22,000 hectares, of land being returned. Sorry? Square kilometers. Square kilometers. 20,000 square kilometers. Sorry, my apology. Being returned. Now that's interesting. So let's just play this out, because Haida is still potentially going to court this year. In the Haida agreement, accommodation is going to be required by the province for the impact on Indigenous title. The Silcotin case in 2014 was very clear, as is the Haida agreement. It's very clear. Indigenous people, where there's title discovered, title found, have the right to benefit from that land. And if that has been alienated, there's a requirement for accommodation by the Crown, because they have alienated the Indigenous right to benefit from their title land. So there's a negotiation that is going on right now in terms of what does that mean for Haida? What does that mean in terms that the province and the federal government are going to be required to accommodate for the impacts on Indigenous title? So now I want to end just with a couple of numbers. There's about $2.5 trillion worth of private property in British Columbia. If all 22,000 square kilometers, and if every other claim around the province is to be returned, which basically includes virtually all private property in this province, what is that accommodation that is required by the province, by the Crown? Because the courts have been very clear. They need to be accommodated for the impact, and they need to be accommodated for the lost value. And not just the current value, but historic loss of value and future loss of value. What is that price tag? Will the public accept that price tag? How do we find a way forward? How do we find a way to solve this? It's not just as simple as returning all the land or providing accommodation. It's not that simple. This is why this conversation is so important. This is why I started off talking about how do we create that equal opportunity? How do we create bringing people together? How do we solve this long, outstanding issue that needs to be solved? It can't be ignored. We need to work together, and it's not going to be me that imposes a deal. It has to be something to work together, but it has to be something that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike can live with and agree on and support in order to conclude reconciliation. It's a big, big issue. Matter of fact, when I was minister, it was called the elephant in the room. And when I was signing agreements and creating, all these economic opportunities and opening up the projects that were done, the business people came to the Premier and said, "You need to triple John's budget. We need to be doing more of this." Of course, they didn't triple my budget, but regardless of that, that's just what we're facing as a society. Indigenous, non-Indigenous alike. We have these issues we have to face. We have to find a solution. It's not as simple as saying this is the answer. That's why I didn't come here and say this is how we have to do it. I came here and said what I want to be able to find is that path towards that's equal opportunities, that path towards concluding reconciliation. And I'm passionate about it. I've worked closely with First Nations all the way through my political career. And many people, some people say I'm racist, and some people support what I've done. I'm not racist in any stretch of the imagination. My constituent system is Indigenous. I'm very proud of the fact that he does great work for the people in my riding. I don't even think about him as being Indigenous, just an individual.
Who is that?
My constituent assistant, I'm not going to say his name, you can look it up. He's not my constituent assistant.
Ellis Ross.
In any case.
I just think DRIPA creates a legislative framework that has the potential to do what you're saying, so then why repeal it, right?
Because there are too many issues that are coming up from it, and it is superseding court cases. We should be living up to HIDA. We should be living up to the cases that have been built in terms of how we deal with this. And, you know, at some point, look, there's bigger issues that are happening, and it was said, you know, are we going to stick together? That's why I talk about, you know, renewing confederation. What happens if Alberta goes? They're going to be facing a vote this year, likely. What happens if they go? Well, that's interesting. What happens to northern BC? I guarantee the Northeast is going to say, we're out of here. We want to be gone. We're going to go and join. We want to join Alberta. What does that mean? How does that create rights and certainty? These are the things that we're facing, and it's big. And all of this has to be in the context of how we work together to solve this. And it's not going to be slap the fist and it's done. But it's how we set the framework to get there, and over what period of time can we expect to get there, and what does getting there look like? And being transparent with Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike so everybody can see this is what you're working towards, this is how it will be resolved. And understanding, just like in treaty, and just like with the Nisga'a Treaty, and I was talking with the nation just a few months ago when I was up visiting. Government, treaty isn't the end. Treaty just sets the framework in terms of how they will work, and how government, particularly provincial government, but federal government too, needs to come in to bring life to it, to create the opportunities, to create that vision that Joseph Gosnell said, which is to create the opportunity for economic potential for the nation. So that's what I'm, you know, all the rest of this stuff and rhetoric and, you know, this side and that side, look, this is what we have to grapple and think about. Which is why we need to have these conversations, which is why we're here. And yes, you know, we're going to take positions. I'm going to take a position. Guess what? The Wet'suwet'en are going to take a position, and the Nisga'a are going to take a position, and every nation in the province is going to take positions, and other political parties will take positions. That's what's needed. You can't just suddenly say, oh, we're going to just implement something. Everybody's going to have positions, you've got to bring them to the table, but you have to have all the facts and information put out there. What will this look like? Otherwise, we're trying to come together to aim at a target that doesn't even exist. What is the target you're trying to do? Can we come to some sort of agreement on what that looks like? And then, how do we get from point A to point B? But you will never get to point B if you don't know what it is. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming out. I know we're out of time and we've gone over. I really appreciate it. I'm turning it over to Sharon to say some closing words.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I would like to express my appreciation for the chiefs and councillors that have come from their respective bands and territories. And I'd like to meet all of them so I can find out who they are again, and so I can connect with them. So that was a bit of an oversight on my part. We did reach out, but we didn't get the response that we were looking for, and it was probably time sensitive. So I want to thank you all very much for your comments. And yes, we will do this again. It's important to me because I need to hear both sides of the story. I need to figure this out, and I need to know. And one thing else I did, a lot of you have two languages. I'm still struggling with English, so there you are. Thank you for sharing your language and your culture with us tonight. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank John and Bruce for coming up and supporting this and helping me through this very intense town hall, because I don't have all the background. John has a lot more than I do, and then Bruce brings his perspective from the Lower Mainland. But I can tell you, being born and raised in the North, we're resilient, and we need to do this together. Maybe we have to have a little different take on how we're going to move ahead and do that, but I certainly want to hear about it. So thank you all very, very much for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for being on my live. This is Dolly with Toten with that scene. Over and out, yeah.